Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome from Rwanda. My name is Ganza More Robert. I am a conservation agriculture lead at ShareScreen Africa. I am joined here by my colleague Johan Kruger, who is the director of ShareScreen Africa, and together we are very excited to be your host this evening. To start, we would love to connect with you. So if you could please hop into the chat box and let us know where you're joining us from and add your LinkedIn profiles. That would be very much appreciated. Now, a huge welcome to Cultivate Africa, your virtual talk series designed to create a vibrant Pan-African community for everyone passionate about agriculture. Our mission is very simple. We want to bring together farmers, agronomists, researchers, and students to share their knowledge, discuss pressing challenges, and explore the innovative opportunities shaping our continent's soil-friendly farming. It's truly inspiring to see such a wonderful and diverse audience with us tonight. And now to officially begin, we are truly privileged to have with us a young and exceptionally skilled leader in conservation agriculture, Chichi Brave Ntaganira. Chichi is a food systems consultant at Ganza Africa, a passionate advocate for community development, and the co-founder of Velve Ag Innovate Limited. On a personal note, Chichi was a classmate at the Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture. He graduated as a valedictorian of the Pioneer class, the class of 2023. He will be unpacking the simple ways to restore soil fertility and affordable techniques for farmers that can be used to bring soils back to life. Now, please join me in giving Chichi a warm welcome. Chichi, the screen is all yours.
All right. Thank you very much, Robert, for a great introduction. Thank you once again. Thank you everyone who is here. As Robert said, my name is Brave Chichin Haganira, and I work at Gans Africa currently as a junior analyst. Gans Africa is not-for-profit organization that works to solve agri-food system challenges, mainly in Africa. We currently work in Burkina Faso and Rwanda. I'm based in Rwanda. And today we'll be talking about simple ways to restore soil fertility. We want to discuss more about practical techniques that farmers can use to not only enhance their soil health, but also yields. Now, before we begin the technical content, I'd like to introduce, I would like to reflect on my background in in conservation efforts. Well, I have a Bachelor of Science degree in conservation agriculture. I graduated my university in 2023. Afterwards, I served as a food systems fellow at Gans Africa, where I worked with several smallholder farmers, mainly on helping them adapt to climate change. And now I'm consulting the Ministry of Agriculture and Animal Resources, mainly on job creation and agribusiness creation for youth and women, but also food systems governance. What we are going to focus on tonight, we'll just look on the practices that farmers can use for improving soil health and yields. We look into how these practices came to have much importance, and we'll look on the work Gans Africa has been doing, mainly supporting farmers, putting in practice the approaches we'll be discussing tonight. Afterwards, I'll conclude my presentation. I do not think I'll use 45 minutes. I just try to be brief so that I don't take much of your time. Now, the practices that farmers can use to improve soil health. I'm just going to focus on conservation agriculture and good agronomic practices. Practices among conservation agriculture, the first is minimum soil disturbance. This is an approach where you avoid tilling the land or plowing the land. You only disturb or you only open up the soil where your seeds are going to be planted. So this can be done through zero tillage, where you completely avoid tillage, or minimum tillage. On the right photo, you can see farmers. This is somewhere in the east part of our country. You could see farmers digging holes across the field. And in these holes, that's where they are going to exactly plant their seed. So this is minimum tillage. Most of the time, minimum tillage works in smallholder settings, while zero tillage works for large-scale farmers who have appropriate equipment for that. The second technique that farmers can use is crop diversification. In this approach, you avoid growing one crop, one type of crop. You want several crops growing on your field. It could be done via intercropping, where you have more than one crop type growing on your field at the same time, or via crop rotation, where you plant one crop type in one season, and then you plant a different crop type in the next seasons. The third practice that farmers could apply is permanent soil cover. And here you want your soil covered. You do not want your soil bare. So this could be done via mulching, where you have crop residues covering your field. As you can see in the left photo, we have maize crop residues covering the field with soybean growing. Or you could choose to use cover crops. You could see maize rows, and in between we have our cover crops. So this could also serve the purpose of covering your soil, and these have several advantages: increasing water infiltration, reducing water evaporation. It really helps farmers in terms of soil erosion, but also when there is drought. Yeah. Now, these three practices, permanent soil cover, crop diversification, and minimum soil disturbance this is conservation agriculture, basically. Minimum soil disturbance, crop diversification, and permanent soil cover. Now, on top of these, there are other practices that farmers can use. These are mainly good agronomic practices, but I want us to focus on proper nutrient management. Here, you do not want over-application or under-application. Well, when you under-apply, then your crops are going to struggle. They are not going to have enough nutrients for their optimum growth. And when you over-apply, your soil is going to be a little bit acidic, which you also do not want for your crops. So proper nutrient management is really key when we want our soils to be healthier, but also our crops to thrive. Now, where do these practices came from? When did farmers choose that they were going to grow crops without tilling the land? Usually we know that actually in my country, it's like it's a given that you always going to till your land before you can grow crops. So when did farmers choose to plant their crops without tillage? When did they choose to cover their soils? So that's what we are going to look into, the origin of conservation agriculture. So the origin of conservation agriculture, I would say it was born after what's known as dust bowls. So the dust bowls were massive soil erosion that took place in the 1930s. It lasted almost a decade, and a lot of crops couldn't grow, and thousands of farmers had to abandon their fields. It was a very difficult situation, mainly for US farmers. So, you might wonder how did this situation really what happened for farmers to face something like this? It started after the First World War. After the First World War, much of Europe was just devastated, and they couldn't be able to produce enough food on their own, mainly wheat. They had to rely on imports. And at the same time, the war had made the usage of tractors more affordable, but also popular. And those two conditions, high demand of wheat, but also availability of tractors, it made the conditions perfect for US farmers to cultivate thousands of acres, and to plant wheat, only wheat, so that they could satisfy the demand, mainly from Europe. So they planted wheat season after season, year after year, until 1930, when severe drought hit many states in the US. And as you might know, when there is drought, there is actually very little rain. And with little rain, no crops could grow. Now the soils were bare, and the structure of the soil was too weak due to monocropping. So farmers had replaced native grasses of the Great Plains with wheat, and wheat didn't have such a strong root systems compared to the native species. So the soil was in a very poor condition, and with drought, there was nothing to hold together the soil. So when the wind blew, it took almost the whole topsoil on thousands of acres of land. So that's how this huge soil erosion happened. And it was until then that the government, scientists, researchers, farmers started to give much attention to practices that promote soil health, practices that protect the soil integrity. So that's how conservation agriculture was born. And if you remember, among the three practices of conservation agriculture, you could see that they directly address the causal factors of the dust bowls. Minimum soil tillage addresses tillage. Farmers before the dust bowls would use tractors to deeply plow their land. So minimum soil tillage would address deep plowing. Permanent soil cover would address bare soil. Due to drought, the soil was bare, and it led to soil erosion when the winds blew. And crop diversification would address monocropping, wheat monocropping. We saw that farmers only planted wheat just to take advantage of the situation of the market back then. So you could really see that that was when conservation agriculture was born. Now the question is, can this work? Can minimum tillage, permanent soil cover, crop diversification, can these practices really help farmers? Can they can they enhance soil health, but also help farmers to boost yields? To be able to answer those questions, that's what made us at Ganza Africa. That's what made us do the project that I'm about to explain. We conducted a project in here in Rwanda, specifically in Musanze district, and mainly we put in practice those three approaches: minimum tillage, permanent soil cover, crop diversification. We wanted to see how those practices can really help mainly smallholder farmers deal with the challenge of climate change. So specifically in Musanze district, climate change is a very severe issue. For instance, due to climate change, we have heavy rains in Musanze, and 89% of farmland in Musanze is susceptible to soil erosion, whereas 40% of the farmland is susceptible to landslides and flooding. And this reduces farmers' yield. A study conducted by Rwanda Agricultural and Animal Resource Board in 2024 showed that due to climate change, maize yield had reduced by 13.8%. For beans, the loss was about 11.3%, whereas for Irish potatoes, it was 25.2%. And this is just the national loss. Specifically for Musanze, in a survey we conducted with 200 smallholder farmers, we found that their averages, the local averages in Musanze, were actually less than 50% or compared to the global averages or the maximum capacity. So for maize, a normal farmer in Musanze usually get 1.2 tons per hectare, whereas a farmer elsewhere in the world is able to get between 4 and 5 tons per hectare. And you could see for beans, the difference also for Irish potatoes. A farmer in Musanze can get around 6.1 tons per hectare, whereas a farmer elsewhere in the world is able to get between 15 and 25 tons per hectare. So you could see that there's an issue in Musanze, and that's what we wanted to solve. So what did we do? As I said, well, before I go into what I said, I almost forgot this very important point. So in most cases, when there are programs to support farmers, most of these are designed in a top-down model. We have directives come from above, from maybe the ministerial level down to the district agronomists and to farmers. And in this process, farmers do not feel the ownership of the project, and they end up not adopting the practices. And this is just a loss. And this is what we wanted to solve. I'll just explain in a minute how we addressed these challenges. Now, what we did, we practiced zero tillage, legume-based intercropping, and mulching to make sure that farmers would own the project, learn from the process, and adopt the practices we were advocating for. We established a demonstration farm, and this was it was 0.6 hectares, which is similar to what smallholder farmers actually farm on. Most of the smallholders farmers in Musanze, the average farmland is about 0.5 hectares. So we wanted to be close to what the smallholders in Musanze usually have. And to make sure that they would own this project, they were the leaders. They were the ones to make decisions from planting up to harvesting. Of course, we were there with them, but we avoided to tell them what to do, but rather sit together and decide together. So on the right photo, the second person from the left is a smallholder who served as a farm manager, and he worked with other 20 smallholders in daily activities on the demonstration farm. And we did this to make sure that farmers owned the project, learned from it, and adopted the practices we were advocating for. Now, again, the question is, did it work? Well, before we reach there, I have some few slides to share on the treatments we used. We tested each practice on its own. We had a zero tillage plot where we didn't till the land, we just planted. We had a plot for mulching, a plot where maize was intercropped with beans, intercropping with cover crops, mainly mukuna. And on the photo, you cannot see mukuna because we avoided to plant them at the same time, as mukuna would take over the whole field. We also had control where we planted maize only or bean. We had two controls, one for maize and the other for beans. We wanted to see the difference between the plots where conservation agriculture practices had been used and control. So now to the question, did it work? what were the results? Before I move forward, I want to mention that we didn't measure our success using the normal indicators for soil health. We usually know that soil health is measured through organic matter, amount of living organisms in the soil. Well, those indicators are really good and objective, but they are different from what smallholders measure their soil's health. They are just different from how the smallholder farmers measure their soil health. Smallholder farmers um, define soil health mainly from yield. If the soil is, if a farmer could get thousands of tons, well, thousands is an exaggeration. Maybe multiple tons per hectare, then they would consider their soils a bit healthier. So that's also what we did. We only measured yield. We wanted to show our farmers that even with these simple practices, they could be able to reverse the trend, to reverse, to address the challenge of declining yields. So for maize, we got around 200 kilograms for almost all treatments. And when you project these on 1 hectare, and we got 200 on only 600 meter square. So when you project it to 1 hectare, you could see that we got more than 3.5 tons per hectare for most of the treatments. And in comparison with the Musanze average, which is 1.26 tons per hectare, and the national average of 2 tons per hectare, you could see that the conservation agriculture practices, the yield from those practices was nearly 3 times higher than Musanze average and 2 times higher than the national average. So as a conclusion, you could see that these practices really work. And for beans, we also got similar results. We got between 50 and 70 kilograms on around 300 meters square. And when you project this on a hectare, you could see that we got almost 2 tons per hectare, which is, well, the local average, I mean, in Musanze is around 0.69 tons per hectare. And on the national average stands at zero point 0.7 tons per hectare. So you could see that we almost tripled the yield for both local and national averages. So this really shows that conservation agriculture practices, they really work. Now, I'm not sure if you noticed this, but our controls performed better than the local and national averages. Yet the control is supposed to be similar to what the farmers do. So let me move back. So you could see that our control on maize, it really performed better than local and national average. And the same applies for beans. Could see that the control, again, it performed better than both local and national average. So why is that? So this brings us to the next section of our presentation, which is additional factors that amplify the impact of conservation agriculture. So for all our treatments, even control, we didn't apply conservation agriculture alone. We combined it with good agronomic practices, and we believe that these are behind the difference between control and local and national averages. So 4 good agronomic practices we used included using good seed varieties, proper fertilizer management, proper pest control, and proper spacing. Again, in the survey we did before we start the project, we found that only 20% of farmers in Musanze used good seeds. And from our observation, it seemed like almost every farmer applied fertilizers just as without prior knowledge of what was in their soils they just applied fertilizers. And for planting, they use broadcasting systems. So that's what we did differently. To source our seeds, we consulted local agro-dealer shops, mainly from 1 Acre Fund, to buy the maize hybrid seeds. Those are the ones we used for maize. For beans, we couldn't find really credible agro-dealer shops we could use. So we used the seeds that farmers use. But for maize, we made sure we used hybrid seeds from 1 Acre Fund. For fertilizer management, we had our soil tested before we could begin the project. And to apply fertilizers, we didn't we only applied fertilizer when the crops had shown signs of nutrient deficiencies. And for pest control, we only applied pesticides when the damage that the pest had done, when there was a risk of actually reducing the yields. You could see on the photo on the right, you could see the fall armyworm, their larva, and you could see the damage that has been done on maize. That's when we could decide to spray pesticides. And for spacing, we didn't use broadcasting system. We planted on rows. You could see rows of maize, rows of beans, rows of maize, rows of beans. And this made sure that competition among the crops it made sure that the competition was at a minimum. And our crops, as you've already seen in the results were really good. So that's what we did differently with what farmers do. And we believe that conservation agriculture is really not complete when done alone. It's good, but it's also important to consider good agronomic practices, mainly in smallholder settings. Now, there are also other two interventions we used in this project beyond conservation agriculture and GAPs to make sure that farmers would continue to benefit from the project even beyond its end. So first, what we did was to create a training manual, including every practice we've used on our field, so that if a farmer at some point in time needs to use one of our practices, then they would have the tools they need to apply the similar practices. And we've made these we've made everything. We just made these training manuals in a way that farmers could be able to understand. We used a lot of illustrations and very few words so that even illiterate farmers could understand what the illustrations are trying to mean. And these training manuals are in Kinyarwanda, the local language, but also English so that anyone could use whatever version they want. Now, the second intervention we used was to create a climate information system. We believe that if farmers have the right weather information, it could reduce their vulnerability to climate shocks. Let's say that a farmer, well, before I give the example, let me first explain how the climate information system works. It is designed in a way farmers could receive daily information on how the weather is going to look like, but also weekly weather forecasts so that they could plan their farm operations basing on how the weather is going to look like. So if a farmer maybe had planned to apply fertilizers and they have just received a notification that it's going to heavily rain in the afternoon, then they would need to reschedule their activity so that their fertilizers won't be taken away by the rains. And all farmers, even without internet or smartphones, they are able to access the platform using USSD codes. Also, district agronomists have access to this system, and it's not only about weather forecasts. It also has um, other features. It has training manuals. It has a part where um, farmers could, agronomists could use to send tips for farmers on good agronomic practices. So it has several features. Yeah, so these were the additional two interventions we put in place to make sure that farmers are able to benefit from the project even beyond its closure. Now, this brings us to the end of our presentation, and I really hope that you've learned on what one has to consider when they are planning to work with smallholders, when they are planning to promote conservation agriculture.
We've been hearing a lot of what you've done with farmers, lots of different researches you've done. I just want to have a simple, very refreshing story of maybe a farmer you met. Might be funny, might be educative. Just one story or two from the farmers
Yeah.
you met while doing your research.
Yes, there is something actually, I will. I'll just say it in the final thoughts, but it's okay. So, when we were working with farmers, they usually smallholder farmers in Musanze, they usually plant beans in a they broadcast. They do not plant on rows. So it was very surprising for them to see us advising them to plant on rows. It was they were just shocked. And something I love about this experience is that they said, you really are not going to get you're not using the space wisely if you're going
Mhm.
to be using that space. We wanted to use
Mhm.
40 centimeters between rows of beans. And just from their recommendation, we chose to reduce the spacing. And as you've already seen in the results, it really worked. Even
Mhm.
the yields for beans were nearly 3 times higher than what they usually get. So it shows
Mhm.
that it's always important to even consider farmers' suggestions. Most of the time when maybe scientists or researchers, when we are doing these kind of projects, we think that we know better than farmers. We think we
Mhm.
are maybe we think they do not have anything to contribute, but that
Yeah.
experience taught us that
Mhm.
farmers' contributions were as valuable as ours. And that's the
Mhm.
importance of co-creating together. That's the importance of
Okay.
making sure that farmers are involved in decision making. Should we not
Mhm.
have listened to them, maybe the results would have been different. So I
Mhm.
think maybe that's a lesson we all can learn. Yeah.
Mhm. No,
Yeah.
that's very enlightening. We had Dr. Coffee Boa on the platform so many months ago, and he talked about how farmers, those that are on farms on a daily basis, are the best scientists. And it was very hard to understand, but with your story, I think it makes sense with learning. Yes, we have our theories, our scientific methodologies that have worked, but it's very important to listen to farmers as well.
Yeah, exactly. The final slides on what we learned. As I already said before, we learned that conservation agriculture, while it is good, if it is done alone, then it's not going to be enough. You always have to make sure that good agronomic practices are also promoted, mainly good seed varieties, proper fertilizer management, proper pesticide application, but also spacing. We also learned that traditional knowledge is wisdom. As I already reflected, farmers contributions, farmers' thoughts are as valuable as ours. Yeah, we are all equal. So traditional knowledge is really wisdom. And we learned that ownership drives adoption. By the end of the project, 90% of the farmers we've worked with have adopted at least one of the principles we were advocating, not only conservation agriculture, but also good agronomic practices. Most of them actually adopted the spacing thing. It was their first time to see it, and we were just happy to see them start to use proper spacing. Yeah. We also learned that upfront costs can be a barrier. We had ourselves tested, but not every farmer is going to be able to do that, especially in smallholder settings. So whenever maybe you are doing such a project, it's always good to cover those costs for farmers if you want to accelerate adoption. We also learned that field testing requires funding, and this is very key. We couldn't have done any of what I presented if we didn't have any funding. So we really thank our donors, our funders, and everyone who is funding conservation efforts. The funds are really key to everything. So I think that's all. Yeah. Yeah, that's all we learned from the project. Thank you very much for your attention. Yeah, it was my pleasure to share with you what we've been doing at Gans Africa, and I will be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you. Over
Thank
to
you
you,
so
Robert.
Thank you so much, Ichi. That was very good presentation, very, very rich. I've learned a lot about conservation agriculture, but it's my first time learning of its history, where it came from. So thank you very much. She asked regarding mulching versus cover crop. When a cover crop is planted within the field with the main production crop, does the cover crop steal moisture and nutrients from the production crop, possibly reducing the yield? That's a question from Teresa Ferguson, and thank you very much for being here. Maybe Chichi, if you can attempt to answer this question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Teresa, for the question. And yes, when it's actually not only on cover crops, but also when we do intercrop. When we are, let's just say we are intercropping maize and beans, most of the time the yields of one of the crop can be reduced due to competition. For instance, maize tend to be much competitive than beans. And I'm not sure if you've seen in the presentation, but in our trials for on beans, the control monocropping performed slightly better than the beans that were in the intercropping system. The control, the yield was around 2.3 tons per hectare, whereas the intercropping was about 1.9. It's not that high difference. The difference is not really significant, but yeah, it's very correct. When you do intercrop, the yield of one of the less competitive crop will slightly diminish, but it doesn't mean that intercropping is bad. It just means that the competitive crop performs slightly better than the less competitive crop. And when you combine the two together, the resulting impact is much more positive than monocropping. Yeah. So that's why we always prefer intercropping than monocropping. But what you said is very correct.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Annette Mtoni, and a round of applause to Chichi. Thank you so much for good presentation. My question is not like it's easy. I didn't know if I heard you saying about applying the fertilizers. I would ask, did you guys use the local fertilizer before you add the modern ones? Because we all know that Musanze district is a district of with full of volcanic eruption soil, So I would like to ask you, did you add the modern fertilizer after the local ones, or you just add only one type of fertilizer? And what was the outcome according to the past few years ago? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Annette, for the question. And yeah, we did apply organic manure, organic fertilizers. Before, well, we applied both organic but also inorganic fertilizers. But the difference was for all the crops, we applied organic fertilizer because we believe it's good for the soil. It increased the amount of organic matter in the soil. But for inorganic, what we did differently from farmers was just we only applied inorganic fertilizers when the crops had shown the signs of nutrient deficiency. For example, when the leaves of maize started to turn yellow, that's when we would apply the maybe urea or NPK. But we really didn't apply inorganic fertilizers like at the start of farming season, and then in weeding, we just applied inorganic fertilizers only when the crops had shown signs of nutrient deficiency. And for beans, we completely didn't apply inorganic fertilizers. We only used manure, and still we got higher yields than farmers. And I think this was a very good lesson for our farmers in terms of cost reduction. Yeah.
All right. I saw a text from Claudia Roth earlier on. When you talked about the history of where conservation agriculture came from, she sent a text in the chat box saying the conditions of the Dust Bowl are beautifully described by John Steinbeck in his work. So for anyone who wants to read more about where it came from, you can read about the work by John Steinbeck. We also have a question in the chat box by Zachary Ndaisenga. He said he has a question about pest and disease management, and he asked, despite the introduction of biotech crops, have you ever thought about the possibility of introducing highly competitive organic pesticides that can work even more than chemicals that might be considered as conservation ways? What are the government strategies to support this initiative?
Well, this is a tough one, but as you said, I also do believe that um, organic pesticides can really be good for not only for crops but also environment and even our own health. I will have to admit that I really do not know much about pesticides, but one thing I do know for sure is that the government of Rwanda is in a process to ban highly hazardous pesticides and phase in safer alternatives. It's a project that has started in this year by making a list of the highly hazardous pesticides that are in Rwanda, setting regulations for their to ban them, and also suggesting the safer alternatives that could be used. It really hasn't. It's not yet on a stage where well, the implementation is still early. That's all I can say, but the government of Rwanda do have plans for banning highly hazardous pesticides. Yeah.
Thank you, Chichi. It's very hard to answer your question being in a position of the government. I would say you've done really well answering that. We have a question from he was a Gracien. He asked, "Hello again. I'm Gracien. My question is, how could you manage the effects of soil health of those synthetic chemical, including pesticides and inorganic fertilizer, because regards to results from different country, that is, there are more negative impact on soil health where use of those chemical stop that rate to soil degradation." and acidic accumulation. And
Yeah, from what I had, maybe the question is about what the country maybe is doing, or probably the strategies that one could use to reduce the impact of chemicals, mainly fertilizers and pesticides on not only soil but also the environment as a whole. That's how I understood the question.
I think you can answer it in that way.
Yeah, so if that's the question, as we've already seen in the presentation, what I can say from what we did is just that it's always good to avoid over application. Well, I'm not going to advocate for, I'm not going to say that you have to stop using inorganic fertilizers because at some point in time they are also useful. What I would say is to make sure that you use them wisely, even pesticides. It's always good to make sure that when you apply organic fertilizers, they are really needed. Otherwise, if you are over applying, then your cell is going to suffer. But also the nutrients in your fertilizers could end up in lakes, and that is going to have an impact on the organisms in those water bodies. So it's always good to make sure that you only apply what's needed. Even the same applies for pesticides. Whenever we see the pest in our fields, the answer is not to the answer shouldn't be to apply pesticides, but to evaluate whether applying pesticides is really the correct move. There are other practices you could do, preventative. I do not remember all the three practices when it comes to pesticides, but I know for sure that it's not always good to just apply pesticides when you first see the pesticides. You've got to analyze the situation and see whether the pest population and the damage is really worth spraying the pesticides. And when you do decide, when you decide to spray the pesticides, it's also good to use appropriate recommendations. Usually on pesticides, we have guidance on how you use that pesticide. It's always good to follow those instructions and make sure that you only apply what's needed. Yeah, that's what I could say. Yeah.
We have a question from Christian Kazige. Uh, he asked, "Do you agree with the statement that the best way to protect the soil is to do is to not cultivate it? If you agree, what can you advise the farmers? If you disagree, why?"
Right. Yeah, I think that was the maybe the whole lesson from the presentation. I totally agree that the best way to promote soil health is through minimum soil disturbance. That could be done via zero tillage or minimum tillage. The second one works better for smallholder farmers. So the reason why I agree with that, it's just that yeah, several studies have shown that tillage, deep plowing, it really has a negative impact on soil. It could reduce how the water infiltrates in the soil porosity, all of those physical characteristics that makes a good soil, they vanish when you continue to plow your land season after season, year after year. On the other hand, when you only do minimum tillage, but also you apply other practices such as permanent soil cover, but also crop diversification, you increase soil organic matter, you increase the living organisms in the soil, you enhance your soil physical characteristics, you increase water infiltration, you reduce evaporation. Like there's a lot of benefits in applying the three principles of conservation agriculture. So in summary, I would say I totally agree with the concept of avoiding disturbing our soils. But I would say that it's advisable not to stop there. You also have to take additional steps. You have to have your soil covered. You have to make sure that you're not doing monocropping, to make sure that you are benefiting, you are getting all benefits that these practices could offer. Yeah. And if you remember well, deep plowing was among the key factors that led to dust bowls or massive soil erosion of 1930. So maybe that's an example of what deep plowing can really do to your soils. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. In relation to today's topic, uh, we run an organization that is Walter's Greenbelt Initiative Foundation. And one of our key project is, the main goal is Lake Naivasha ecosystem restoration. And one of the key project is reforestation and Lake Naivasha riparian care. Now, we do plant native trees along the shoreline, and we do mulching with the water hyacinth, because water hyacinth is one of the invasive plants within Lake Naivasha. Now, we do use mulching. We do use water hyacinth as mulching. Is it appropriate to use these in terms of soil moisture, soil content, soil nutrients improvement? Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. To make sure I got you correctly, you're running an agroforestry project near a lake, and you were wondering whether those trees could serve as mulch for the lake shores. Is that the question?
Yeah, the question is, would you advise the use of water hyacinth as a mulch? Thank you.
So well, I'm not sure I pronounce well that crop, but they are what we call amarebe in Kinyarwanda. Is that correct? Well, because
Yes, that's the word, teacher. Yeah.
all right. So because these in our country consider them invasive species, and they really had played a negative role on our lakes in the east part of our country. So maybe for farmers in Rwanda, I wouldn't advise to use them, as they would take over the whole community and kill fishes. So I wouldn't advise farmers in Rwanda to use those due to their past due to the effects they've been having on our lakes. It took a lot of years, a lot of efforts to remove those on our lakes, and our lakes are now back to are slowly recovering. So I wouldn't recommend them. But if in your case maybe they are working, if they do not pose any harm on your lakes, I do not see a reason as to why you should not use them. If they provide the required organic matter to your soil and they serve the same role as mulch, yeah, I do not see a reason. But in Rwanda, they've been a very significant issue, especially for our lakes. So I wouldn't recommend them in Rwanda. Yeah. Maybe we can learn from what you've been doing to be able to use them on lakes without them impacting the lake ecosystem. Yeah. Yeah, I think I would be interested to learn more about what you did differently. Yeah.
It's maybe my first time, maybe second, I remember I presented on a soil and soil earthworms. I'm impressed about what you guys have been doing, and I see you have a big audience. I particularly appreciate what you are learning about how to deal with farmers. First, you listen because whenever human beings are doing something or watching, they're always learning. We call it constructivism theory in education. You can't be doing something without learning, or doing without learning. So when farmers do things they are learning, and it's not really easy to come up with something new and you tell them and they adopt. They need to think twice or even more. So I like what Chichi did. Actually, one of the most effective way to convince farmers to adopt these new technologies to have them see by themselves. So when you have a plot, a demo plot in their fields, they see, they compare. That's how they make their own opinion about something. So I like what you said about that CA alone is not enough. We have some constitutions here in Rwanda where farmers can think, oh, see that is making the CA work. So maybe, uh, yeah, we need a kind of quality systems thinking. And some people say for CA to work, it takes a long time. That's another deeply rooted idea that we are struggling with. We can still see effects even in one season. That's what you saw in our demo plot here at Rika. The demo established before after you left. So when you do CA, then you march, then when you have a case of maybe these erratic rainfalls, because that can stay longer in the soil, then you see better germination in an CA process than non-CA. Those are immediate effects. I also like what you said about maybe farmers wanted to measure everything using the yield. It's something to consider because your soil may be building health, soil health may be building progressively, taking time. You may not see the best yield you want the first season, but still that takes time. But also, if you know farmers only listen to only want to see yields, of course, it's a good idea to emphasize on these GAP, a good seed, a good starting point, and then a good fertilizer, using the 4 Rs, right amount, right type, etc. It's a good practice you did. I don't know if you have a time to or opportunity to assess what you call the residual effect to see how this continues in the next 2 to 3 years because it's wanted to see something works, but then it needs to show the long-term effects of the CA. We all expect, experts, you all expect to, as far as been asking about the soil health and the fertilizers, we all expect, according to the books and the CA research so far, you expect maybe as a farmers party CA in the longer term, we should be seeing the dependence on chemical fertilizers reducing. Maybe as we should soil health in time, we should see less need for nitrogen fertilizers, for example, because you should have enough nitrogen in the soil. Maybe not P, not K, but maybe on N. That's something you should be seeing in the long term. It doesn't mean CA is against chemical fertilizers. It's not against. Some of these concerns that chemical fertilizers are not good for soil health. I talked to someone doing earthworms here in Rwanda, the golden insects. He is practically against these chemical fertilizers. There was this group of people promoting what called regenerative agriculture, which for me is not different from CA because of the soil is almost the same. Probably for them, they are against the use of chemical fertilizers. But as you said, at least from the beginning, it's important to play a big role. Imagine you're starting from maybe a highly depleted soil, like the ones you have in Rwanda. Using chemical fertilizers allows you to have a massive biomass. That biomass being produced is that will cover the soil and decompose and then speed up the regeneration of soil health. So it is always needed and important. We should be able to know how to use them judiciously, as you said, efficiently, adding what is necessary. As you know, we tended to go beyond these free principles of CA because we think they are focusing on the soil only. They're not enough for promoting the soil health. You may be doing CA with those free principles, but if you over apply fertilizers, you're polluting your soil. If you over fertilize, then there is erosion because we actually CA should go together with an efficient use of resources in agriculture. So thank you for Chichi for the presentation. Maybe if you can share maybe with me your something, your trials, I will be happy to learn more about what you did and maybe about your initiatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert, for this time. And thank you so much, Chief, for the excellent presentation that you given us this evening, and for the insightful ideas that you shared with us. Yes, I have 3 questions for Chichi. It's quick follow-up questions. First question, I want to build on what Christian Kazije raised earlier. So, Chichi, since you mentioned that you were like approach zero tillage, how would you approach the challenge of soil hard pan without using tillage or without tilling the soil? Because as far as I know, we have so much problems with soil hard pan in eastern part of the country, especially Bugesera district. The second question, as we know, as agronomists or the farmers, we are always looking for the ways to reduce the cost of production for farmers. I want to know, Chichi, how would you compare the cost that is being spent for the farmers who are doing conservation agriculture and farmers who are doing conventional tillage or minimum tillage? And the last question, would you advise farmers to shift directly from conventional tillage and jump to zero tillage? Or would you recommend like a gradual step-by-step transition, for example, from conventional tillage to minimum tillage and then to zero tillage? Thank you.
All right. Thank you very, very much, Simon. I think these are very good questions. Now, starting with the first one of how to break the hard pan, the very hard layer of the soil in zero tillage systems, I would say that we had an advantage that the field we used was not it was just a usual farm. It wasn't a field where it wasn't a construction field. Like there really was no well, maybe the hard pan was there, but it wasn't that difficult. But again, we had the advantage since that was the farm that was usually it was under active farming. So I think maybe that hard pan had been broken down from previous operations. So it was somehow very easy for us to just apply it. And if I could correct something in the presentation, I do not believe we did zero tillage, but minimum tillage because we made holes where the seeds would go, and that is minimum tillage. So I think we had that advantage for us of using a field that was under active farming. Also, since smallholders really do not use the heavy implements, heavy tractors, I think the soil in Musanze wasn't that compact. So it was also another advantage that we had. But for farmers who who are operating on a field where there is a very hard layer, I think a little bit of tillage could maybe be helpful. And this brings us to the last question you asked, whether I recommend straight transition or progressive transition. I would recommend progressive transition. And the first reason is not about the solid layer or other stuff. It's just that most of farmers in Rwanda are not used to conservation agriculture. They are not used to minimum tillage, permanent soil cover, maybe crop rotation, they are used to it, but mulching and minimum tillage, it's not that much of them. So whenever you want them to adopt, it's always good to do it progressively. For instance, in our demonstration farm, what we did, we didn't practice all three practices on one field. We chose to separate them to give them options. If you want to use mulching, here are the results. You could see for yourself that it works. If you want to use minimum tillage, these are the results. You could see that it can work. So we wanted to give our farmers options, and even the results approved our methods. At the end of the project, there is no farmer who had adopted all three practices of conservation agriculture. Actually, most of them had adopted good agronomic practices, and some of them, most of them, it was about good agronomic practices. So we believe there is that usually how maybe farmers work, and it even applies to us. If you bring something very new to me and you say you have to change, I'm going to push back a little bit. So it's always good to make sure that we are doing things progressively. At least that's what we did, and it worked. Yeah. It can even work on the hard pan issue you raised. With a little bit of tillage, you could be preparing for your soil to transition to zero tillage systems. Now, to your second question about the cost, we actually didn't measure the costs between the CA and conventional, but some of the some parts of our project show that CA really cuts on cost. For instance, on minimum tillage treatment, we didn't plow the whole field, and that was one cost that we've reduced. On fertilizers, for beans, we didn't apply any inorganic fertilizer. That's also another saved cost. And for maize, we only applied inorganic fertilizers when the crops had start to show symptoms of deficiencies. That also is another cost that is saved. So you could see that CA really it saves some money. I had another idea I wanted to say on this. What is it? Well, I remember. I wanted to say that sometimes, again, to start CA cost, it can be a little bit expensive. For example, soil samples. To take soil samples and to have them analyzed in the JIT lab, it's very expensive for smallholder farmers. So that's why I would even advise people who mainly work with smallholders, it's always good to cover those costs for them. Or maybe prepare them to be able to be in a position that is going to allow them to cover that cost on their own. But when you're just starting the project, it's not something they are going to cover. Maybe I would say that's the only thing that I think, in my experience, is going to be difficult for farmers. But other practices, they're actually going to help farmers save some money, mainly on minimum tillage. They're going to save a lot of labor. But also fertilizers. Yeah, I hope I answered all your questions.
Actually, it's not a question, it's a support. And thanks very much, Chichi, for a wonderful presentation. You'll bear with me by the time Chichi was explaining to the question of Mrs. Ferguson. I was on the road, so I couldn't unmute myself. But I thought that I have a support to what Chichi explained. Mrs. Ferguson asked a question about that if you plant two crops simultaneously, then the yield will drop. And Chichi explained well, but I need to add another point where that before you do this, you have to have prior knowledge about the nutrient system transfer and root system working mechanism of your plants. And when you know them, they will influence your spacing and alternating as well as rotational systems. And when you do well, you do the right spacing and the right rotation systems, sometimes you can have both yields increase simultaneously without one affecting another. So that's what I wanted to add on what Chichi said, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. This is the benefit of having rooms like this. You are not an expert alone in a room. You are actually with so many minds and experiences that can supplement what you're talking about. So thank you very much, Emmanuel, and everyone in the room. I'd like to give time for Johan Ruga, who is a farmer, by the way, to come in and give a word or two about the presentation.
Thank you, Robert. Chichi, first of all, I just want to congratulate your organization with initiating and concluding the study. I think we need so many more of these studies that really make a massive contribution to the field of conservation agriculture and agriculture in general. And secondly, you are a natural presenter. I think also that your connection with local farmers and the fact that you are clearly working with them on a day-by-day basis really makes you bring this content to us with real authenticity, and that you know what you're talking about, and that comes over. So my recommendation with you is keep your feet in the soil and keep working the way that you do. I think we need more young people like you in the field. Thank you, Chichi, and we will definitely invite you back.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
I'm
much.
really honored. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Chichi. Thank you, everyone. This month we were talking about soil health and practices that improve soil, and we are happy to conclude this month on a high note by Chichi's presentation. We are going to look at the technological innovations that help African farms in March, and you are very welcome to join us back in March, and we'll be having another Cultivate Africa talk on 2nd of March, where we'll be looking at low-cost technologies that are positively influencing African farms.